Hey there, this is Anthony Metivier, and I'm not Batman, but I always have a plan B when it comes to using memory techniques, and so should you. So, one of the most problematic things in the world with mnemonics and memory techniques and memory tricks, whatever you want to call them, is how you got to be prepared. There's a great movie called Ghost Dog, Way of the Samurai, and in that there's a quote from a book that he's always going on about. And one of the quotes is that a samurai should always be prepared to execute one last move, even with his head cut off. And I think it's the same way with memory techniques. The problem being is that you can't always do that. I mean, I was talking with Dellis on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. He's a multi-USA memory champ and does all kinds of great work with Alzheimer's research and Climb for Memory. You should check that stuff out. And it was asking him, what do you do when someone catches you out or catches you unaware, off guard, and so forth? And also, I was speaking with Jonathan Levy about that on a recent podcast episode. And, the question is, why do people who have extraordinary powers with memory techniques, why is it that sometimes they just don't use them? Like, there's sometimes just the silliest situations, or it is silly that in certain situations you don't pop them out. They're in your utility belt, It's like Batman not using his batarangs when it's just so obvious that that's the situation that they're there for. So, one plan B is just to work on being more prepared, being that samurai who can execute one last move even with your head cut off, so that you can use memory techniques on the fly. And so that's just practice. That's just being aware, even just thinking before you get into a situation that you're going to use them. Like if you're going to a party, be prepared that this is the kind of place that you're going to want to use them. Like when I went to the polyglot gathering last year, I had a feeling that I was going to be tested and I was going to need to demonstrate and put the proof in the pudding. So I didn't just go there and hope and pray that mnemonics were going to work for me. I went there with the mindset that when someone tells me their name, I'm going to memorize it. When someone throws a phrase at me, I'm going to memorize it. And so it was a lot of fun. But if I went in there, my head would have been cut off and I wouldn't have been making one of those last moves. Now, all that said, one of the things that you can do to practice is to create what I call impromptu memory palaces. And so that basically means, and it's very good for memorizing names, is that you actually use the place where you meet people as a memory palace. So the bad advice that people give about memorizing names is you make some kind of crazy image that you place on someone's face. Now, it's not necessarily bad advice as such, but I think it's one of the most disrespectful things that you can do to another human being is, see Homer Simpson farting on their nose or whatever crazy stuff that you come up with. That's not good. That's not polite. You could at least put it on their shoulder. But if you want to practice having an impromptu memory palace, then you can put it behind them, like in a corner or by a plant or on a table, something like that, and you're just practicing using a memory palace on the fly. It's very, very good. The other thing that one needs to consider, and it's something that Jonathan Levy and I were talking on the recent podcast of the Magnetic Memory Method podcast that he graced me with an interview for, and all of us, is that there are just some things that, it's not worth the energy for. So, for example, he was coming to visit me in Berlin. I couldn't remember when he was coming, and he couldn't even remember when he was coming. And he said, you know what? I just have it on my calendar. A notification comes up. It's just not worth the mental space when I'm working on memorizing Russian. Now that is something where you want to leverage the power of your memory and what you've developed for memory skills. Now, that's not necessarily the right thing to do, but it is a way of thinking about it if you're someone who's into notifications. Now, in a recent math course that I've put together, a video course, I've talked about how to make a memory palace out of the calendar, how to make a memory palace out of each and every week, how to memorize the numbers of days and times and what kinds of appointments you have. I think that that's well worth your effort without waiting for notifications. But again, if you're like Jonathan and you'd rather use your mental powers for memorizing Russian phrases and vocabulary and grammar rules, which he did with stunning success using the magnetic memory method for the cases, well, I mean, have at it. The point is that you always want to use memory techniques for the things that you're going to use them for as part of practice of extending to other things. Now, there's always notebooks as well. You know, if you meet someone and you want to get their number and you really want to get it, then there's no shame in writing it down. Memorize it later when you are feeling like you're not on the spot. But do try to memorize it. I mean, there's a very interesting story that happened to me in London where I met a girl and I gave her my notebook to write down the number, and it was raining, pouring rain. And so when I looked at the notebook, all I saw was a blob of ink. And then I said, wait. Tell me your number again and do it real slow. And she didn't do it that slow, but I memorized it, called her. It was her number. So everything worked out in the finish, as that character in Pulp Fiction says. Everything worked out in the finish. And so I was the samurai who was able to execute one last move, even though my head was cut off when the rain destroyed the number that she had written there. So that's really, really important. The other thing you can do is, everybody has these whiz-bang, razzmatazz cell phones and smartphones and all that stuff. Make an audio recording of stuff so you don't have to lose it. But always with a mind to practicing memorizing it later. Always work on memorizing things later. So for example, I'm learning Chinese right now, and one of the tutors that I work with, we kind of like he's very interested in memory techniques as well. So we try and come up with mnemonics as we're going along, and it's a lot of fun, but it's a huge burden on the mind, and it creates a lot of cognitive overload. So really the thing is to make a record of the things that we're memorizing and learning rather, and then memorize it later, but make sure to go and memorize it later, because when I don't go and memorize it later, then I show up to the next Chinese speaking session and learning session with nothing done. So it's gone. So you gotta actually follow through and memorize the stuff if you're not going to do it on the fly. And with language learning, it's not impossible, and you can really build up to it, and it really is possible if you're prepared. But when you're first learning a language, it's not all that advisable to try and do it on the fly. You want to actually create memory palaces, put the associative imagery in places along that journey, and then recall them as you go through again and again until you get it into long-term memory. And so I've got some stuff coming up about how to do this with something like Pimsleur that I've been experimenting with, and it's actually quite successful. I think you're going to have a lot of fun with it. So if you're interested in that, subscribe to this channel. The last thing that I would really say about this whole topic is learn to use mnemonics. It's so super powerful, but don't stress about it if you are in a situation and someone comes up and tries to challenge you. And listen to that interview on the podcast with Nelson Dellis, how he talks about how he deals with it. And there's nothing to prove to people, even if you're the best mnemonist in the world. You don't have to prove yourself. You can go and compete to create records and show the proof is in the pudding. But at the end of the day, what really matters is the results that you get from your private practice. Mnemonics are an art, and it is the art of memory. And so the extent to which you satisfy yourself is always going to outweigh the extent to which you satisfy others. Of course, you want to pass exams and be able to speak fluently in other languages or recite poetry or whatever it is that you're going to do, but take your self-satisfaction first. I think that's absolutely 100% critical, and the point of art in general is to please yourself. And so that's all that I have to say about having a plan B for mnemonics, because it is super important to use the tools in your Batman utility belt, but be able to innovate on the fly. And if you have to use other tools that record and store and allow you to recall information, like audio recording or writing down notes and so forth, if you have to do that, use the memory tools later when you have space and there isn't time pressure and so forth. So thanks for watching. Click like, share, all that kind of stuff, and come on over to magneticmemorymethod.com when you want to know more, because there's lots of resources there for you to enjoy and use for improving your memory. And until we speak again, keep magnetic.